Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my ranking of the superhero and comic book movies released in 2022 from the worst to the best. Now there could be spoilers throughout, so you can check out the description for the movies that I've mentioned just in case you haven't yet seen them. So we'll start off overall with 6 movies that I consider to be superhero films, and at number 6, at the beginning of this list, unfortunately as the worst comic book movie of 2022, and that belongs to Black Adam. The mega budgeted $200 million project starring movie star Dwayne Johnson has been amongst so many debates around the state of the DC movie universe regarding the shift in hierarchy, the Henry Cavill Superman cameo at the end credits, the announcement and then retracted of his return, and the movie's own financial underperformance at the box office. But primarily as a film, this was a really hectic, overblown mess, going super hardcore in terms of action and effects, very much leaving story and characterization at the back door. The movie left Johnson so constrained in a super serious stoic tone, taking away the charisma of his acting that is really the biggest part of his superstar status. Now whilst there were some positive elements regarding the likes of the JSA in terms of Pierce Brosnan's Dr. Fate and Aldous Hodge's Hawkman, the movie itself had no clear grip on the lead character or the narrative, and sadly just ended up being a noisy generic addition to the superhero genre. So sadly, after the much hype and marketing and debate over the movie, it ended up being yet another low bar for the current DC cinematic universe. We then move on to number 5 on the list, and that is Morbius. After the major success of the first Venom movie from 2018, this was Sony's second attempt to widen a cinematic universe around Spider-Man's most iconic villains, this time focusing on Michael Morbius, who was a revered scientist suffering from a fatal blood disease who experiments on himself and as a result gains super abilities but also suffers from the bloodlust of a vampire. Now actually there was some potential in terms of the atmosphere and tone of this film, but it sadly ended up being very choppily edited, where clearly there was a much better movie that was trimmed down for mainstream appeal, but sadly it didn't amount to much or leave a lasting impression. Alongside some nonsensical end credits featuring Adrian Toomes from Spider-Man Far From Home, Morbius was yet another example of how ill-advised Sony's Spider-Verse is, and despite them continuing on with the likes of Kraven the Hunter and Aunt May, it's probably best for them to keep sharing Spider-Man with Marvel for now. We then move on to number 4 on this list, and that is Thor Love and Thunder. A somewhat significant entry within the MCU as it marks the first character to have 4 solo films within the universe, but sadly that's where the significance ended, as instead of telling something substantial, director Taika Waititi and mainstream star Chris Hemsworth decided to refer back to the comedic approach from Thor Ragnarok and double down on it even more. The result was an overindulgence in humour that just didn't land or click in terms of consistency or tone. Christian Bale's Gore the God Butcher was yet another lackluster villain within the MCU, and even Thor himself was a character shown far more as a bumbling, almost stand-up comedian, a further regression of the character that we've seen since Avengers Endgame. Love and Thunder was just a disappointing sign of laziness and uninspiredness that would happen often within Marvel's Phase 4, and one just hopes that if we do get a 5th installment of the character, that it turns out to be far more serious and substantial, that's really worthy and fitting for the character himself. But sadly as it was, Thor Love and Thunder ended up being just a badly misjudged comic misfire. We then go on to number 3 on this list, and that is The Batman. Matt Reeves' sombre, more nurtured reboot of the character followed much more of a detective noir story as the Caped Crusader tracks down the serial killer of the Riddler, as well as dealing with the corrupt criminal element within Gotham City. Very well crafted and technically sound, The Batman suffered from an overlong, near 3-hour runtime, and perhaps an all too realistic approach that felt much more like a police procedural, and the problem there is that you take away a lot of the comic book feel and imagination that we normally would associate with comic book movies. And this was seen particularly with the interpretations of both the Riddler and Oswald Cobblepot, so far and away removed from their iconic versions that they're barely unrecognisable. Now to be fair, Robert Pattinson did well in the lead role as Batman, but his Bruce Wayne and Batman alter egos were virtually the same person, so there was no real contrast or dynamic in terms of their overall personalities. The character is literally just the same all the way through. So whilst I wouldn't put this version anywhere near as good as Tim Burton's movies or Christopher Nolan's films, the Batman was still overall a solid and well accomplished, if not slightly overlong and slightly mundane, comic book adaptation. We then come up to the runner-up on this list, and that is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. And the final movie within the Marvel's Phase 4 ended up being one of the most strongest. Of course, the sad passing of Chadwick Boseman cast a huge shadow and catharsis as Marvel decided to proceed with the sequel without recasting the role of T'Challa. But with established characters such as Shuri, Okoye, Nakia and Queen Ramonda even more prominent, the film still held up enough with very strong performances to back up a solid story, also with a great musical score and soundtrack and some emotional weight, especially in the final scenes. And overall, this was enough to overcome probably a runtime that was about 20 minutes too long and some issues in terms of Namor's interpretation and his depth in terms of a character. So whilst it wasn't as good as the first film from 2018, it still stands as a compelling enough addition, particularly in terms of paying respect to the legacy of Chadwick Boseman. So we then come on to the #1 position on this list, overall the best superhero or comic book movie of 2022, and that was Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Benedict Cumberbatch's Sorcerer Supreme this time went up against a more villainous Wanda Maximoff, traumatised by the events that we saw within the WandaVision series. And out of all of the comic book movies released within 2022, Multiverse of Madness was visually the most eye-catching, the most spectacular, and probably the most well-balanced in terms of its tone and structure. Yes, the diversion into the Illuminati cameos, clearly feeding off the hype from Spider-Man No Way Home, might have been an unnecessary direction, but overall it was handled swiftly enough not to derail too much from the main story of Doctor Strange, who was still the most prominent character despite many debates that he was superseded by Wanda. And for me, this was the movie with the best visuals, the most entertaining, and probably the movie out of all that I would probably revisit again if I had to choose one to rewatch. And overall, it was probably the second best movie within the Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe after Spider-Man No Way Home. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and breakdown of what I deemed were the best and worst superhero movies of 2022. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you disagree with any of my choices or feel there were other movies that were left out that should have been included in this list, then also let me know in the comments and we can have further debates afterwards. If there are any other best of or top 10 lists that you'd like to see me cover regarding movies or television shows or entertainment, then also let me know. And if you have any other topics or subject matter that you'd also like to see me cover within the channel, then also drop me a suggestion within the comments and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on those topics within the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves and I will see you very soon.